Hi, y'all. Sasrikal. My name is Tak, and I'm going to be your instructor today for this workshop on decolonizing our dietetics practice and preceptorship models. So I'm so thrilled to be here. I'll share a little bit about myself, and then we're going to cover 3 topics today, and I'll go into each one of those briefly and then in detail as the workshop progresses. So first, a little bit about me. As I mentioned, my name is Tak Bhandal. Mera naam Takdir Kaur Bhandal hai. I'm a instructor at UBC at the Social Justice Institute, and I also teach at Dalhousie University, where I'm based right now in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on Mi'kmaq Treaty territories, which is governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaty. And I teach in the social work department as well as in the nursing department, primarily on the topic of decolonization, and then more specifically around mental health and addictions. And so that also includes things like food addiction or food control. And I'm going to go into some of that in our workshop today. And I've been working in this field of mental health and addictions for the last 10 years, teaching in it, working in various nonprofits on this focus. And I have been doing my PhD at UBC at the Social Justice Institute as well, looking at how we can incorporate pedagogies or philosophies of teaching like decolonization into health professions practice, mainly because health professions, in my view, like you all are freaking amazing. You are the healers of society. Like we do so much of the care work for our communities, for our in these borders, for this country, as well as globally. And I feel that if we can get health professionals on board with decolonizing practice, like, whew, magic can happen because of the ways that healthcare is an upstream determinant of health. So when folks come to us, when clients come to us, when students come to us for mentorship, we have such a responsibility to show up as role models, to be kind, compassionate, empathetic, as well as to undo some of the trauma that has been imposed on people through the process of colonization. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a huge nerd. As you can probably tell, I love school, I love reading. I feel really passionate about these topics. And on the side, I sometimes put on my cape in the evenings and weekends, and I run my own business that's called I'm with Periods. That's the letter I, the letter M with periods. You can find us on Instagram or at imwithperiods.com. And in this business, I teach folks how to use the 4 seasons of menstrual cycles approach to tune into the natural rhythms of their bodies in order to live cyclically, in order to revitalize the divine feminine in the world. And I feel that living cyclically not only promotes things like sustainability, prevents burnout, allows people to tune into their intuitive needs around food and nutrition, movement practice, but is also one additional way, or maybe even like a foundational way, that we can decolonize because of the ways that colonialism works to push us into this understanding and way of being in the world that privileges intense levels of productivity, constantly working, achievement, productivity, linear progress and success, the idea that exponential growth needs to happen. And what we're finding is that this model is actually causing things like intense amounts of burnout. It's depleting the Earth's resources. It's creating situations where people don't have time to like nourish themselves and cook for themselves and their families. It promotes a fast food culture, a processed food culture, in the ways that people feel more and more and more constrained with time. So one of the aspects of decolonization, which I'll go into, is sort of shifting the way that we live and work to more of a cyclical model. And for those of us who menstruate, we can use our menstrual cycles as like a built-in tool to be able to do that. So the three topics that we're going to cover today, the first one is the definition of decolonization, so that we can, be here on the same page within the same framework using that proper definition of it, rather than something that's just broadly related to social justice, let's say. And the second topic that we're going to cover is the soul wound of settler colonialism. And I'm excited to share that with you. And then the third topic is unlearning fat phobia and weight stigma in the healthcare system, because it is so rampant. And I will explain how it's linked to colonialism. I can basically link anything to colonialism and how we can move forward the practice of decolonization in our practice, in our mentorship with students, as well as in our home life, in our relationships, in our finances, in our life's passion and purpose, as well as in our health. So let's start with that first topic, number one, which is the definition of decolonization. And I use a definition that has been provided by two scholars, Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang. Eve is based at the University of Toronto, and Wayne is based south of the border at the University of California in the Ethnic Studies department. And they wrote this amazing paper in 2012 called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And it's available open access, meaning that you don't need to have a subscription to the journal to access it. It's available for free. So you all can read it, look into it. Decolonization is not a metaphor. And in this paper, they share, it's a long paper, it's about 40 pages, but they go through what colonialism has done in these borders that we call Canada, how it impacts folks who identify as Indigenous, as well as folks who identify as settlers who have come to these lands and settled here, as well as folks who might identify as arrivants, meaning that they have been displaced from their homelands and or stolen and taken from their homelands and brought to these borders. For example, the transatlantic slave trade, peoples whose ancestors have come to the borders of Canada through that are often called arrivants. And that comes from another scholar named Jody Bird, who wrote a book called The Transit of Empire. So we sort of fall into one of these three forms of identity: Indigenous, settler, arrivant. Maybe we're a mix of those. A lot of identities exist on a spectrum. And so decolonization is going to mean different things to each one of us based on our own ancestral lineage and how we've showed up to these lands. But in essence, they share that the definition of decolonization is the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. So that is the giving back of land and life to Indigenous peoples of the world. And this is so important to our survival as a species, because Indigenous peoples, which is often sort of like this monolith category that we group people into, when in fact indigeneity is so diverse. There's so much multiplicity in terms of language, in terms of worldview, in terms of, people's meal plans and diets that they've adhered to. So when I say Indigenous peoples, let us assume that it is cut out there for a second, that it is a broad category of people. So it's not just one type of Indigenous people, it is diverse, and they exist all across the globe. Our neighbors, our kin, they might be our own relatives. So with that, the definition of decolonization, to recap, is the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. And so I'm going to challenge you all to read this paper, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, and notice what comes up in your own body and mind as you read it. Because they're just like, they're straight up in that paper. They're very blunt, they're very to the point. And you might notice that your own trauma might be coming up, your own maybe defensiveness is coming up. So what I'm going to do right now is teach you a quick meditation. We're going to do a meditation with each one of those 3 topics that we're covering today. That's going to support you to regulate your own emotions as you learn more about decolonization, because at least for me, when, for example, I read that paper, I felt my body come up with a lot of defensive feelings or feelings of guilt or unworthiness. And that's all good. We want to make sure that we're feeling those emotions so that they can be processed and released out of our body. But at the same time, we don't want them to like create chronic stress in our life, because when we're chronically stressed, you all know like the havoc that can create in terms of our own bodies, our ability to absorb nutrients, the food choices that we make. So we're going to learn something called regulating, and we can use this process of regulating as we do things like learn more about decolonization. We can use regulating when we're working and mentoring students in our preceptorship practice. For example, if we're like finding ourselves really frustrated, maybe by a situation with a student, or maybe a student has done or said something that has like set your nervous system into like freak out mode. And or if you're working with a client and that same thing happens, either you're triggered or there's like you're in a room and there's a student next to you and something has happened where you need to bring your nervous system back down into a calm state so that you can react and respond appropriately in that moment towards and in service of decolonizing practice, we can do that. So imagine that my hands are on my thighs. I'm going to demo it and then we'll do it together. So we're going to place our hands on our thighs like this and just get into a comfortable seated position wherever you are. So just feet firmly planted on the ground. If they were crossed, you can uncross them so that we can feel the land underneath our feet there. And then we'll just notice the position of our spine. So sometimes when we're at a computer, we're leaning forward, hunched over. I'll just invite you to bring your spine up and long, maybe rolling your shoulders back a little bit, not forcing our body into any position, but just getting into a comfortable space where we're treating our spine in a good way. And if you are sort of looking down at your computer like this, you can bring your neck up so that it's nice and long and in alignment. So what we're going to do eventually, right now, I'll just show it to you, is we are going to pedal our hands to the rhythm of our breath. So we're going to breathe in, lift one hand up and breathe out, and put it down, breathe in, lift the opposite hand up, breathe out and down. Continuing on this process, pedaling our hands to our breath. And we're going to do it for about 90 seconds. So that's all it takes. And essentially what regulating is doing is taking our sympathetic nervous system, so our fight or flight response that might be activated when we're in a defensive mode. So say we read something in this paper, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, that gets us like super worked up, like, oh, it wasn't my ancestors that did that, or it's not my fault. I like can't change what my ancestors did. these sorts of feelings that tend to come up when we're learning about decolonization and the impact that colonialism has had, including potentially what our ancestors have done in previous generations, our body can get all worked up, or our mind, and our sympathetic nervous system gets in that fight or flight response. Or, for example, you might have anger, frustration coming up, or it might be like sadness, guilt, worry, shame. And when that comes up, we again want to feel that and process it for about 90 seconds. That's about as long as most emotions like to live in our body. And then we want to turn that sympathetic nervous system response down and turn up our parasympathetic nervous response, which is the rest and digest state, so that we can digest that emotion. We can get into a state of peace and calm where our cortisol levels come back down, and we can respond appropriately to the situation, whether that's with a student that we're mentoring, something that we're reading, with a patient or client. And I share this in service of decolonization because of the ways that our modern society, which is built on colonialism, tends to keep us in a high level stress response, with burnout, with our cortisol levels just like coursing through our body all through the day. And what that's going to do is, when we're in that stress state, we basically project that onto the people around us, which reproduces things like violence, suffering, pain, even on the micro scale, but it can be on the macro scale as well. And we want to let go of that. We do not want to reproduce colonialism in our everyday lives by being stressed the F out and stressing out all the people around us, because that is not a good way to be. And we don't want to put that out in the universe. So regulating allows us to turn that down, the sympathetic nervous response when we've done processing and feeling the emotion, and turn up our parasympathetic nervous system. So let's do it together. Put our hands on our thighs. We're in a comfortable seated position, feet firmly planted on the floor. Our spine and neck are long and tall, shoulders pulled back from the ears. And whenever you're ready, you can close your eyes. And just start to tune into the rhythm of your own breath today, wherever it's at. Breathing into the center of our body, the base of our lungs. And when you're ready, you can just start pedaling your hands to your breath. So breathing in, lifting one hand up, breathing out, putting it down, breathing in, opposite hand up, breathing out and down, and just continuing on at your own pace. Maybe even bringing a smile to your face as you do this. One more round. Good. Well done, y'all. Well done. So when you're ready, you can just rub your hands against your thighs or against one another and open your eyes, come back into the room. Welcome back. So that was the process of regulating. As I mentioned, regulating helps us in the process of decolonization by allowing us to be in a state of peace and calm so that we can live with an open heart, we can project kindness, compassion, empathy out into the world, as opposed to some of those lower vibration negative emotions like violence, pain, suffering that are associated with colonialism, as well as things like competition. So regulating, being in that state of peace and calm allows us to collaborate more easily and move forward movements like decolonization. So the second topic that I'd like to cover today is the soul wound of settler colonialism. So this concept, the soul wound, the wounding of the collective and individual soul, is something that has been written about by two scholars and psychologists in the borders of the US, Eduardo and Bonnie Duran. And they wrote an amazing book in 1995 called Native American Post-Colonial Psychology. And in their practice with clients, what they found was this wounding on like the soul cellular level that has happened as a result of settler colonialism in these borders actually creates like a pain, an intense like gaping hole almost in our energetic center. And stay with me now, everybody is made up of our energy, our entire universe is. We're all like a collection of atoms that are vibrating 99% empty space. So we have this energy and energetic core that's within us. And some people refer to it as the soul. And this soul wound manifests in many ways. So it can manifest as numbing out through things like food. It can manifest as intense forms of addiction, whether that's to various plant medicines like cannabis or opioids, or alcohol addiction, fermented drinks like alcohol. And that can happen no matter where you exist on the spectrum of identity, because every single one of us has experienced this soul wound, regardless of identity. It's there on a collective level. So the soul wound can also manifest as overconsumption. So buying things, shopping addiction, feeling like we need to buy more and more and more, can manifest as things like exercise addiction. It can manifest as things like depression or anxiety. So we want to be able to address this soul wound in our practice, even just naming it, like, hey, with our clients, this might be related to the soul wound of settler colonialism and the impact of intergenerational trauma on our bodies. So we're going to work together to be able to release some of that trauma, address it, talk about it, so that people can develop healthier relationships with food. And when it comes to our mentorship with students in our preceptorship practice, the soul wound can manifest as things like feelings of needing to have control or power over our students. So if that's you, just like, raise your self-awareness and consciousness about that. Do you find yourself feeling like you need to control them or exert your power and authority over them? It can manifest in our preceptorship practice as students feeling really scared and fearful and unworthy in themselves. So these are things and like little flags of the soul wound that we want to look out for and be able to address in our practice. So the soul wound, as I mentioned, can have many different manifestations. And when we start to heal it, whether that's trauma we've experienced in our own lives, in the womb, in our childhood, as young adults or teens, or even as adults now, or intergenerational trauma that has been passed down to us through things like DNA methylation, the epigenome. Once we start to heal that, we can show up as our best selves as our highest selves for our students that we're mentoring, for our patients and clients. And we might notice that when we start to address some of these emotional and mental and spiritual blocks, or traumas or limiting beliefs or trapped emotions, that the physical body starts to change. Because a lot of times people use food to numb out, to soothe themselves, to self-soothe, to, feel pleasure because of the reoccurring stress of that trauma that lives in our body. Similarly, students might be doing that, or it can show up as feeling like we need to control food. So, when people get obsessive compulsive about food, when they start to get really restrictive maybe about it, obsessive in the sense that they might develop disordered eating. A lot of that stems back to the trauma that people feel in their bodies, which impacts our biochemistry. It impacts our ability to relate to people, relate to our own bodies. So we 100% want to make sure that we are getting to those root causes of, the pain that students might be feeling in their practice, or uncertainty or worry, fear, as well as with our patients and clients. And when we work with our patients and clients in this way on a deeper level, we're also acting as role models to our students to say, hey, like, we don't just talk about these surface level things, like, which are obviously really important, like, what do you eat every day? How can we support you to create a new meal plan? That's also incredibly important and vital to the practice. But at the same time, we want to role model that we are addressing some of these root causes that come through things like colonialism, like intergenerational trauma, so that our students also realize that this is really important for them to address. And, while we're not trained psychologists or therapists, there's a lot of therapeutic methods that we can use in our practice in order to do that. So, for example, one way is simply asking people, what's your ancestral lineage? First, naming yours. So, for example, I can say, my name is Tak. My ancestors come from the Punjab region of modern day India and Pakistan. And then my parents immigrated as sort of settlers on the border of settlers and arrivants, because they were displaced from those homelands because of violence, to the borders of Canada. And we've settled on the West Coast, on Coast Salish territories, since the 80s. And I was born and raised, in Burnaby, BC. And you can share this about yourself so that we're building a sense of trust and rapport with our clients, as well as with our students. So do this practice with our students as well. And then we ask, what is your ancestral lineage? And, stop, wait for a response, not just waiting to talk, but actually listening. And you'll find that people start to open up, they get excited. You might say, oh, what kinds of ancestral recipes were passed down to you? What did your ancestors like to eat in the wintertime, let's say? And that just opens up and creates this dialogue where people can feel like it's okay to talk about their ancestral lineage. And note that I'm using the words ancestral lineage instead of culture, because culture is dynamic. It's something that's created. We can start to think of it as like arts and culture. It's something that is constantly shifting and moving and creating. It's not static. And it avoids, by using ancestral lineage instead, we can get like really, 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 really specific, down to sometimes even which village people came from, as opposed to culture, which tends to be quite broad and sort of creates an us and them binary that we need to break down. Because that us and them is, part of colonialism. It's how people were able to say, okay, these folks are not human and we are human, and so we can inflict violence on them because they're not the same as us. So when we use ancestral lineage, we open up multiplicity, we open up more than just two answers. And also notice how I'm avoiding using racialized identity. So racialized identity, we all have one. Typically it's a color. So for me, my racialized identity is brown based on my skin color. And that also as well is very limiting because we only have, like 4 to 5 options of racialized identity. So use this language of ancestral lineage, share yours, start with that protocol, because in lots of Indigenous First Nations, for example, where UBC is on Musqueam territory, protocol there is to name your lineage, name the land that we're on, acknowledge the hosts, thank them for having us as invited or uninvited guests there, and then we continue our session. So you can practice this with your family members, with your friends, so that you can get comfortable doing it in your practice with students as well as with clients. So we're going to go into a meditation around the soul wound that's going to help us. You all can learn this. I will teach it to you, and you are more than welcome to do it with your clients as well. And what I'm going to share is that we are going to conjure up a memory from our subconscious that was a situation when somebody said something about our body that made us feel basically really shitty. And we're going to choose something on the spectrum, let's say, of little t trauma, like a little thing that just really bugged you and just feels like it's still there, stuck in your body. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's big T trauma, capital T trauma. So those are things like sexual violence that people have experienced, loss of family members, physical violence and suffering, for example, of things that people might have experienced in residential schools or that their ancestors have. And just notice now, even as I talk about it, how your body is reacting. And just know we're not going to go into the big T trauma stuff today. That's something that you want to go into with a trained facilitator, practitioner, refer clients to trained therapists to address some of that big T trauma. So what we can do in our practice, in our everyday lives, is focus on some of those little T trauma pieces because it's sort of like a death of 1,000 cuts type situation. So when we start to let go of those little T traumas in our body, just opens up more space for people to let in abundance, let in decolonial ways of being, allows them to decolonize their body and mind. And it just creates more room and more comfortability with releasing trauma, so that when it comes to dealing with those big T traumas, it's just easier and people have had those small wins. And, if some of those big T traumas come up in your client practice, that's okay too. Hold space for it, let people share those with you, allow yourself to be a really good listener for it. And you can do this meditation with them around that big T trauma, but ultimately you want to make sure that you're referring them out to your colleagues who are trained therapists and counselors to be able to address that. Because I don't want to put you all in a situation where you've unpacked something and you have no idea what to do about it. So with this meditation, we're going to pick a little T trauma in our lives. So for example, for me, in my high school, I remember a friend of mine saying, not about me, but about somebody else in our high school class, oh my God, I hate curly hair. Curly hair is so ugly. I just hate it so much. And, as somebody with curly hair, I found that really offensive. But at that time, I didn't say anything. And a lot of what society showed me in advertising, in magazines, even to this day, when you look up curly hair, it's actually hair that has been straightened and then curled with a roller. So a lot of the messaging was also like, oh yeah, curly hair is ugly. So that stuck in me, and it created like chaos and imbalance in my body. And when we feel shitty about our bodies, we, resort to things like various forms of addiction. And so we want to release that. For example, food addiction. We want to be able to release that, to allow people to feel great about their bodies, their natural bodies, their true weights, exactly how they have been bestowed upon them. So I would like you all to choose something like that, a little T trauma that you experienced, that somebody said something either about your body or about, your body type, just in general, whatever it is. Feel free to come up with that. And when you have that, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and again, get into a comfortable position in your chair. So feet firmly planted on the ground. Spine is long and tall, neck is long and tall. Shoulders are relaxed away from our ears. Just start to tune into the rhythm of your own breath today. Breathing into the centers of our body, so the base of our lungs. Well done, y'all. Well done. So when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to conjure that image of that memory of the person saying it. And imagine yourself like as first person point of view. So you're in your body, you're looking out through your eyes, with eyes closed, but through your mind's eye, your imagination center, and you're imagining the scene unfolding. And just notice any emotions that come up in your body, any tingling sensations, or pain, or really anything that comes up as you imagine this happening. Good. Allow yourself to feel that so your body can process it. Really good. And now imagine yourself as the other person who is saying the thing to you, the second person in this scene. This is going to be a little bit challenging to our mind and body. So imagine yourself as that person. You're going to get out of your own body and imagine yourself going into that person's body. And imagine them saying it. And imagine what they are thinking and feeling. Because a lot of the times when people say these negative things, it's because they're unhappy with their own selves. They have some own insecurity or some own trauma. And if this feels inaccessible, like you're too angry, resentful to this person, that's okay. You don't have to. You can just stay in your own body. But if it feels like it's accessible to you right now, just imagine yourself as that other person saying that thing, and imagine what they are feeling in their body. Really good. So now we're going to get out of their body, imagine ourselves leaving again, and we're going to go into bird's eye view and imagine ourselves looking down at this scene, seeing the scene unfold, just taking sort of like a meta step back from the situation. Good. And now we're going to imagine ourselves taking a photo of that scene. So imagine you're a photographer, you're looking at the scene, you've got your camera, and you're just going to snap a photo of it. We've snapped a photo. Good. Now we've printed the photo and we're going to put the photo up on a wall in front of us and put a frame around it. Really good. And so it can be any frame that you like, any color. The wall can be any color. And now we're going to put a black and white turn the photo black and white. So before it was in color, now we're going to change it to a black and white photo of that same scene. Good. And now we're going to put a color hue on top of it. So it can be red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, purple, any color hue you'd like to put on top of the photo. Good. And now we're going to flip the photo upside down. Really good. And now we're going to shrink that photo down to a little tiny version of it, as small as you can imagine it. Really good. Now we're just going to stop. We're going to wiggle our fingers and toes, rub our hands against the outside of our body, maybe our thighs, and slowly open your eyes and come back into the room. Welcome back, y'all. So what we did with this process of imagining ourselves in that scene, putting ourselves in the second person's body, imagining ourselves in that scene as that second person, if it feels accessible. Then we went to the bird's eye view, and then we went to the photographer's eye view, and we snapped a photo. We put that photo on a wall in front of us. We put a frame around it. We made it black and white. Then we put a color hue around it, and then we flipped it upside down, and then we shrunk it. And essentially what we're doing is using the tool of neuroplasticity, knowing that we can actually shift and change our brain and our neural patterns by reducing the intensity of the emotion that's associated with that scene. Because when we reduce that intensity of emotion and or fully release that emotion from our body as we do it, again, we're opening up space for some more positive emotions, for new neural pathways to be created around abundance, love for our body, body positivity, and we're sort of healing the trauma that's around where we hold that experience in our body. So again, I invite you to do that with your clients if you like, around some of those little t trauma pieces, and then refer them out to practitioners with the big T trauma. And if the big T trauma comes up in your practice, just, your clients feel comfortable with you, they share, I experienced sexual assault when I was a child, then we want to make sure we're holding space for that. And we want to allow them to share it with us, because emotions shared or experiences shared, the emotions with that are halved. And then we can still do this practice with them if it feels safe. So basically explain it to them step by step. This is what's going to happen. With the big T trauma, I recommend not going into the second person because it's so intense and emotional. Like, who wants to be in the body of their abuser? Nobody. So you can just skip that part and just go straight into the bird's eye view and the photographer, and slowly, or sometimes really quickly, we can reduce the intensity of the emotion and trauma. And sometimes that's enough just to allow people to be like, yeah, my body's effing awesome and I love it, and I'm never going to allow this person to take that away from me. Whether that's experiences of colonization that have been passed down, or any sort of adverse experience or trauma that's been experienced in people's bodies. So try it out for yourself. You can, do this on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, in times that feel comfortable to you, in situations that feel comfortable. And if you have a therapist, a counselor that you work with, you can share this process with them and ask them to be there with you as you maybe work on some of the big T trauma pieces. And the more we open up space in our own bodies by releasing that trauma, the better mentors we're going to be, the better role models we're going to be, the more compassion and kindness and empathy we're going to have space for to hold for our students and clients. And yeah, it's amazingness. And there are a lot of instances, for example, of Indigenous specific racism that people have experienced in their lives, students, clients, patients, and those sorts of pieces that have been said about people's bodies are going to be somewhere on that spectrum of trauma, either little t or big T. And these are the types of experiences that we can start to reduce the emotional load, the traumatic load around, and or release them. And it's all going to be good stuff. So I myself am being certified as an emotion code practitioner, supporting people to be able to release some of those big T trauma emotions without ever having to consciously go into that experience. So there are methods that you don't even need to go into the experience or remember it. You can do it through our subconscious if those are too painful. So someone like me is a great person to refer people to if you need help around helping clients address some of those really big, intense, traumatic experiences. Okay, so we're going to go into the third and final topic for today, which is unlearning fat phobia and weight stigma in the healthcare system. And the reason that this links to colonization and decolonization is many ways. So the first way is that colonialism as a process has basically created a bottleneck effect of what is an seemingly or deemed an appropriate healthy body shape and type. So you all can imagine basically what was on the cover of Women's Health magazine from 1980 to 2000, maybe even 2015, the types of bodies that are linked there, which have often been photoshopped and altered. So super thin, zero body fat, six-pack abs, that is what has been deemed as the healthy ideal of bodies, when in fact, if we look all over the world in previous lineages and histories, that has not always been the case. So different lineages and geographic regions have idealized very different diverse body types. And people exist in all different body types and shapes based on the climate that they live in, the environment. For example, people who live in the borders of Canada, who might have lived, their ancestors might have lived in the northern regions that were really, really, really cold. Even, the southern border where most of us live now used to be a lot colder than it has been as of right now for the last 10,000 years. And therefore, people have adapted and evolved particular body types to be able to withstand those cold weathers. And colonization, essentially, what it did in Canada, as I mentioned, is narrow down and create hierarchies between different body types, putting one healthy body type as the ideal. And we are unlearning that because every single person has their own true weight, has their own constituency that's the right weight and constituency for them. And one can be super, super healthy, vital, energetic in that constituency, or one can be super unhealthy and frail. And it exists on a spectrum. So people with more robust body types, with thicker bones, again, can be really healthy and vital in that constituency, or super frail. Similarly, people who are thin boned, and more, fit that sort of like slim body type can be super healthy in that constituency, or really, really frail and unhealthy. So we want to understand that everybody has their own true weight, their own constituency that is ideal for their body type, and move away from being afraid of fat. Like, we have created a culture in which fat on our body is seen as scary, fat that we ingest is seen as scary, when in fact our bodies, you all know this, developed fat as a survival mechanism. Like, without fat cells, we just wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have enough fuel to make it through our days. So this is something that we need to unlearn because of how rampant weight stigma is in our healthcare system, particularly in intersection with indigeneity. So a lot of folks who identify as Indigenous experience not only weight stigma and discrimination, but also Indigenous specific racism, creating sort of like a dual or a double burden of discrimination on them. And it can create, like, already folks who identify as Indigenous might have mistrust in the healthcare system because the healthcare system itself has been a tool of colonization over the years. So just as much as there were residential schools, up until the 1990s, there were also hospitals associated with those residential schools where all sorts of atrocities and violences took place. So already there's this mistrust. So by adding weight stigma on there, treating people poorly based on their weight is just going to add to that oppression. And this is not just something that I'm making up. Like, there are many peer-reviewed studies looking at how weight stigma operates in the healthcare system, showing that people who are deemed obese or overweight, aren't treated the same way. They are often ignored or written off, or their health problems are basically, for example, around endometriosis. Sometimes it takes 10 years to get an endometriosis diagnosis just because, healthcare providers just keep saying, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight, and all your health problems will disappear. When in fact, there might be an underlying cause there, whether that's emotional, physical, spiritual, or a mental cause that needs to be addressed first, that's going to support people to get to their true weight, whatever that is. So for instance, helping people learn their constituency and their true weight, in my homelands of South Asia, we have an ancestral healing modality called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is sort of a fusion of East African medicine because of the migration from East Africa to South Asia, as well as Central Asian medicines, and sort of a mix between those, and it's been around for thousands of years. And in Ayurveda, people are often grouped into one or two constituencies or doshas. And so the three doshas are Vata, V-A-T-T-A, which is sort of like an air sign, ether. I tend to be more Vata leading, where you're like up in the air. You have a hard time just like sitting still. You like to be in movement a lot. Your mind and computer is like a very fast processor. And then the second dosha is Pitta, and that's a mix of fire and water. So really fiery, really competitive, like competitive sports and activities. And then the third one is Kapha, which is sort of an earth sign. So super mellow, super chill, loves leisurely activities and hanging around, cuddling in bed. And each one of these constituencies, we have a primary dosha and a secondary dosha, and we can actually create meal plans based on those doshas to help balance them. So for example, Vata balancing diet or meal plan might be to avoid things like broccoli and cabbage and some of those vegetables that create a lot of air in our body, and have more grounding veggies, the kales, the spinaches, the sweet potato, and then kapha, which is super mellow and really grounded, actually really benefits from things like cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, that creates that air and lightness in the body. So what we want to do is start to ask people again about their ancestral lineage, start to incorporate some of these healing modalities from all around the world into our practice, or at least be aware that they exist, so that we can create these positive relationships with food that aren't based on calorie restriction or weight shaming or body shaming in some way. And, obviously realizing that over the last 50 years, the way that people eat, particularly in the borders of North America, is a lot of fast food. It's a lot of processed food. It's, a lot of things that create toxic load in our bodies. So I fully understand that, but at the same time, negative reinforcement can re-trigger people based on experiences that they've had as a result of colonization. So we want to, as much as we can, take a positive reinforcement approach by doing things like asking people about their ancestral lineage, using metrics like the dosha system that aren't based on people's weight or BMI, and create new ways of supporting people to understand their health and health indicators, and help them, eat whole, nutritious foods. And when people start to get excited about their ancestral lineage, their ancestral foods, that just helps them create like a healthier relationship with food, gets them excited about cooking and nutrition, which is all good stuff in our practice. And similarly with students, I had a student the other day who came to me when we did a class on weight stigma, saying, thanks for talking about this, because literally 2 weeks ago, I had a healthcare provider tell me that I need to lose weight when the issue that I went in for had nothing to do with that. And it's just this constant, again, those small cuts, that small wounding, or the constant pushing on the soul wound that continues to create this trauma, continues to reproduce colonialism in our healthcare system, which is something that we want to unlearn and undo. So as much as we can role model this for our students as well, it's just going to help them be confident in their own bodies, in their own practice, and help them support our clients in a good way as well. So I'll leave it there today. Thank you all so much for listening. The final meditation that I'm going to share around that third topic, around weight stigma, is actually a little bit of homework. And it's the practice of mindful eating. So what I'm going to invite you to do is the next 3 meals, or even 1 meal, if that 3 feels too inaccessible, the next meal that you have, you can choose, any one, whether it's the next one, whether it's the next dinner, breakfast, lunch, snack that you have. I'm going to invite you to do it totally mindfully. So meaning you're not reading, you're not looking at a screen, you're not scrolling through your phone, you're not checking emails. You're literally sitting there with the intention specifically of eating. And we're going to take a bite and taste the food. You might even close your eyes, taste it in your mouth, feel it moving down into your body. If you're more of a vata constituency, and your mind's always racing, or whether that's just your mind, no matter what, you can even think, I'm feeding my most perfect body, the most perfect food, if it helps to have sort of like a mantra running through your brain as you do this. So we want to eat mindfully, not while we're watching TV, not while we're talking, basically. So we just want to sit there quietly, eat it mindfully, and just notice what it feels like. Maybe this is a practice that you already do, so it's just going to be second nature to you, or maybe it's not. Maybe it feels totally new and foreign to you. And this is a practice that's also going to help our clients, because by mindfully eating, we are able to tell our hunger cues more. We're able to actually appreciate the food and have positive emotions come into our body as we're ingesting the food. And we're also role modeling to our students. So if our students see us in our preceptorship practice, sitting at our desk, scarfing down our lunch while we do emails, what kind of message are we sending out to them? We're sending out the message that we live in a system of colonialism that doesn't even afford us the ability to share gratitude to the food that we eat. That's the reason why we're all here in the first place. So I'd like you all to start role modeling that, practice with one meal, see how it feels, and take it from there. So thank you all so much for listening and watching until the end. I am so incredibly grateful that you are even interested in this topic, that you're interested in learning more about it, that you're interested in applying some of these principles in your practice. And I'm really looking forward to staying connected. So you can reach out to me. You can find my email on my website, which is imwithperiods.com. That's the letter I, the letter M with periods.com. My email is there in the contact us page. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at I'm with periods. So the letter I, the letter M with periods, and reach out with any questions that you have. If this workshop resonated with you, I would love to hear. I'm happy to share any additional readings or resources, podcast recommendations that are going to help you on your learning journey. And I'm also happy to receive referrals to any clients who are dealing with some of those big T trauma experiences that you would like some support around. I do host virtual sessions. Even though I'm based in Halifax, I'm happy to take folks from all across the borders of Canada. So don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to hearing from you. Sending you so much love, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.